about 2 years, this author, Ta-Nehisi Coates, he wrote a book, like a well-known book called Between the World and Me, about his experience as like an African-American man. But he came out with the work of fiction. And he was being interviewed by Jessamine Ward, this great author. She's the only person to win the National Book Award twice. So we were in this venue on St. Charles Ave, like right next door to Loyola, and it was a huge crowd. I mean, it was filled to capacity. It's a synagogue in St. Charles Ave. Even like the top level was like filled. So the author, he was a little thrown off by it. It was the largest crowd. It was like the largest crowd he had ever been around. So as he was talking, people like were in the back yelling, like, "We can't hear you. We can't hear you." And he's, "What do you want me to?" You know, he's sitting down in a chair with like another person, and it's like, this is supposed to be this, very personal sort of experience. You know, so it was like, I don't know. So he's like trying to speak a little bit louder. So then there was another woman in the balcony, and she kept yelling like, "I can't hear you. I can't hear you." He was getting like really annoyed. So then he responded, and then he looked up at the lady. He's like, "Can you hear me?" And she said, "Yes. Now, if you can just speak slower." So then he was really annoyed. He's like, "Now this lady's telling me to speak slower." So he told this beautiful story, and then he looked up at her. "Is that slow enough for you?" And she was like, she packed up her stuff and left. He was so embarrassed. I was trying not to look at her. I'm like, okay, everyone in the auditorium is looking at her. I'm like, she doesn't need me looking at her, you know. So I waited a few minutes, then I looked up and she was packing up her stuff.
I like that. Well, welcome everybody. This is the next podcast. Your host, Daniel Avity.
Hi, I had to use the bathroom on that. Yeah, so today we have a special episode. It's always a pleasure to have Mr. Curran, but we have a new interviewee. Introduce yourself.
You know my name?
I know your name, but I want you to, so the people at home, the folks at home know your.
I just wanted to see if you knew my name.
Go ahead.
I am Julia Hutto. I'm a senior in the class of 2021. Thanks for being here, Mr. Curran, for indulging me in this experience. In Ali's email, she mentioned that you mentioned something about Shakespeare. I just wanted to hear what you had to say about that.
Okay. All right, so let me sort of try to frame this discussion. We're 20 years into the 21st century, and I think we're at the point now that we can really examine things that we just took for granted, things that we just assumed. I think there's so much information that's going to be coming to light soon, and I think that's important that students start questioning accepted beliefs. So we can start with the Shakespeare authorship question. I firmly believe that the man from Stratford did not write the plays attributed to William Shakespeare. Now, the reason why I mention this is not to create any confusion or to rile people up. The reason why I mentioned it in class when we study Shakespeare is that if you look at the common image that students have of William Shakespeare appears in the first folio. Now now this etching, there are all kinds of codes in this etching, and it does not present Shakespeare in a positive light at all. He's dead-eyed. There's like no life to him at all. So when teachers, are discussing the canon of Shakespeare, and the one image that they have is this flat, superficial, one-dimensional, lifeless image, it's hard for them to say, okay, So why am I supposed to get excited about this guy? Why am I supposed to get worked up about this guy? And studies, there have been all sorts of studies on this etching that reveal a lot. First of all, that he's got two left eyes, and he's got two left arms, which all suggests this idea of like a pen name. So I don't want to go too deep into that because there are a lot of signs there. Even Samuel Johnson's introduction said if you look to this left, and there are all sorts of coded messages saying this is a demand of Shakespeare. Now, why is it important? Like I said to the students, does it really matter if it's one dead guy, from 600 years ago that you never heard, or another dead guy? Well, I believe that's important. So Edward de Vere was a very interesting man, a very colorful character during the Elizabethan period. Traveled to Italy, and he was really impressed with the art, the culture, the music, everything that was going on in Italy during their sort of Renaissance. And when he returned to England, he spoke to some other great minds like Francis Bacon, and he basically said, we hold ourselves up to be this great society. What are we doing for humanity? What are we contributing? Italy, they have art, they have music, they have great literature. What do we have? We don't really have too much, And he said, if this is really going to be a renaissance in a enlightened period, we need to spread these ideas, to the rest of the population. And Bacon and other people said, yeah, but we're living in a very oppressive society. This will never get past the crown. The monarchy will never approve of it. So they decided, well, if we try to explore these great ideas about humanity, about the arts, about the sciences, in the form of a play, we probably won't pick up on it. It's one thing to write a pamphlet and try to distribute it to the public. It's something else entirely to present it through plays. So that was England's attempt to spread all these ideas about the human condition, about the arts, about the sciences, through plays. Now, Francis Bacon and some of these other people couldn't do it because it was going to ruffle the feathers of the monarchy. So he created this sort of straw man, in the form of William Shakespeare. And during the time period, evidently, everyone knew that the man from Stratford did not write these plays. So when a name was hyphenated during the Elizabethan era, it was like a dead giveaway that it was a pen name. Like everyone understood it was a pen name. I believe the man from Stratford really existed, but he found a person whose name would fit this pen name. So when you say like spear shaker, this is supposed to be a reference to the muse of the arts, shake your spear. So then the name, and so this is Athena. So the idea was spear shaker, it's the muse of the arts. She wore a gilded helmet, a gold helmet. It translates from German, the first part of it, Wilhelm, a gilded helmet, and then spear shaker. So they just happened to find a man who sort of fit that. And he went along with it, and because he was getting paid, he didn't care, But no one really gave it much thought. And when he died, nothing was said about him at all. He died. But it was only really about 100 years after his death that people started building up this image of William Shakespeare. So it's interesting to note when you look at people who are authorities on Shakespeare, scholars are adamant about the man from Stratford as the playwright, but actors, directors, people who actually interact with the work, people who have to breathe life into these characters, they all say that the man from Stratford did not write Shakespeare. These are people who interact with the work, who perform the work. The former director of the Globe Theater is going on record like that. There's no way that this man wrote it. And they're great actors. Trust me, they're all great. But the man who, but there's some great documentaries. There's some great documentaries. And I'm a member of the Shakespeare Oxford Society. The reason is just behind it. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating. So I think in about 10 years, that the myth of Shakespeare is going to be gone. Yeah, not even 10 years. Not even 10 years. The evidence is overwhelming. The evidence is overwhelming. So I could go on and on and on about it. But in the 1990s, two justices from the Supreme Court sat down and they had a debate. And the evidence was presented from both sides, and they ruled in favor. Probably the author. Hamlet. I'll give you a couple more examples. So you don't think I'm crazy.
People at home, what do you think? Mail in your response. Is Mr. Curran insane?
Actually, this whole debate actually started with an English high school teacher. I mean, a teacher in England, and he was presenting like this. He just presented the same old story about Shakespeare, and the students are like, I don't buy this, because they had studied Greek. You know, they understood the educational system, their current educational system, and they understood what the educational system would have been like for someone like Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, and Stratford. And he wouldn't have had that type of grasp on Greek. You know, he wouldn't have understood Ovid that well. There's just no way. Like, unless he had private tutors, unless there was somebody in the village, you know, who understood Ovid, he wouldn't have figured it out for himself. You know, and the guy was just, you know, just combating this like day after day after day. And then finally he just said to the students, right, okay, let's do some research. Let's get to the bottom of this. And it was all because of the students who were just looking at him. This doesn't make any sense to us. All right, so there are a couple things. At one point that this is not evidence or anything, but it's just something that just doesn't make sense. So if you look at the work of Shakespeare, and if you look at all the incredibly complex female characters that Shakespeare created, it seems totally unreasonable that his daughters were illiterate. So why would a man who created characters like Desdemona, Portia, not teach his daughters how to read? And we know they're illiterate. I mean, they were illiterate. The records show that. You know, they couldn't sign their name. So why? Why would he do that? But in terms of like more hard evidence, Edward de Vere, when Edward de Vere's father died, he became the ward of Queen Elizabeth, and she paid him the equivalent in today's money, about $1 million a year, to promote the arts. But we never see anything published in his name. So when he died, again, he was under the care of Queen Elizabeth, and he received like top-notch education. He was tutored by the greatest minds in England. And there's one tutor who taught him Greek, and he taught him Ovid. You know, he spent a long time on Ovid. He spent a long time studying the Metamorphoses, which is like central to just about every one of Shakespeare's plays. There's some type of reference to Ovid's The Metamorphoses. This man had a book that he published. There was only one edition of it, and it's in that book he presents sort of like these aphorisms or like these truisms. You know, we talked about English stuff. So it's a series of sort of like wise sayings. And in Hamlet, our character Polonius gives his son some parting words as he's leaving to go off to college. And almost all of those little statements are from this man's book. They've never been published. The only Oz who ever saw those lines would have been De Vere and family members. William Shakespeare definitely would not have seen it. And it's taken almost verbatim. These proclamations that Polonius delivers to his son are almost verbatim. And that book now is held in the Folger Shakespeare Library, and they will not let the public see it. It's really kind of silly.
I believe that powers that be, the government or whatever, is withholding information about the truth about William Shakespeare.
I think the academic world has sort of circled the wagons because they've invested. I mean, we have these people like Marjorie Garb or Stephen Greenblatt who dedicated their whole lives to this idea that the man from Stratford wrote the works. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to concede that because everything falls apart. The PhD thesis, everything, all the books that they wrote, that all falls apart. That's the academic end of thing. But for, playwrights, actors, directors, most of them have already embraced this idea. I was watching Marjorie Garber, and I have a lot of respect for her. She teaches at Harvard, and she was presenting these lessons through the Harvard Extension School on like Macbeth and some other plays, and her insight is fascinating. But as a student asked her a question, and he prefaced it like something like, "Well, if Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare," and she cut him off. And she said, "Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare," and she repeated it like 3 times. And I saw like a totally different side to her, and I was like, "Wow, she's really defensive." I mean, she wasn't even willing to entertain any sort of discussion at all. But it makes sense. Her career has been based on the assumption that the man from Stratford. So going back to like where Shakespeare is buried, in the church, there's a message in Latin, and it's in English and Latin, but the opening line, it says, "Stay passenger, why pathest so quickly?" And it's calling people to read the statement and really read it and look for messages. So there are about 4 lines that are written in it's in bad Latin, but this man Alexander Watt has translated it, and he's identified all these names. They're all references to great writers, and like Chaucer, Byron, and I think like 2 other. I can't recall the names right now. And they're buried in Poets Corner in Westminster Abbey. And Alexander Wilde has looked at that area, and there's a spot between Chaucer and that's what they think. And he's petitioning Westminster Abbey now to unseal this marble slab. Do you think that Edward de Vere is buried there?
So wait, you mentioned Byron. That's after Shakespeare's time.
Yeah.
So did they make this? They inscribed this message after, several years after Shakespeare had died.
Yeah. Originally that message. Now Shakespeare is holding a quill, mm-hmm. But originally he was holding a sack because he was a grain farmer. So they replaced the grain sack and they stuck a quill in his hand. Weird.
Interesting, yeah. Makes you think.
I really believe it's only a matter of time.
I hope you're right.
How much do you think the Shakespeare brand is worth? like the IP of Shakespeare. Is like Shakespeare's estate of like a legal force that would have something to lose if Shakespeare was exposed as a
Well, I mentioned
a
that
pasty?
book that De Vere had, and now it's being held in the Fulton Shakespeare Library. You know, so he bought it. He bought it and stuck it in a vault. But I did watch. I've watched a lot of documentaries on this. And there is a man. I think he's from Sweden, and he's really into codes. And during the Elizabethan period, he really he wrote a lot of stuff in codes. Like Francis Bacon wrote a lot of stuff in codes. So this man goes through like the first folio, and he points out like all the codes in the folio. And at first, this is like the head of the Fulton Shakespeare Library. He's like, he's having none of it. You know, he's having none of it. And the man was like, well, let me just point out a couple things to you. And then he had hooked. You know, next thing the man's like looking at it, he's like, oh wow, that's fascinating. And seemed like he was coming around.
Seems to me like the Folger Library has some monetary stake in the general consensus about Shakespeare. Maybe they wouldn't want their books to sell less or something, but definitely they just.
I was just reading in the New York Times the 100 best books of the year, and three of them are revisiting like these really hackneyed, Shakespeare stories. And I was like, wow.
Short stories or
no, just the life of
really?
Shakespeare, like biographies. You know, like 3 biographies.
I think that's better history. People like it's great man history where everything kind of concentrates into one figure that people can just know and like, wow, he's solely responsible for all this greatness, and that's a hero.
Yeah. Okay. I don't expect you to have weird opinions about aliens and stuff. Or do you have weird opinions on aliens? So the topic I was going to transition to was, since we attribute all of this greatness to William Shakespeare, and it might not be true that he is solely responsible for all his work, there are a lot of people that contribute a lot of certain monuments in the world to not being the work of the cultures that built them. How do you feel about that? And how do you feel about contributing those monuments to extraterrestrial forces and beings?
Well, I mean, I would like to hear explanations. You know, like the art, like Machu Picchu in Peru. I mean, scientists have studied these stone and like we don't have the map. We didn't have the technology. You know, we didn't have the technology to create these works. So that's another reason why, now that we're in the 21st century, I'm hoping that people will be more open to discussion, and especially when it comes to science, because I don't think science should be influenced by public opinion. Scientists should work independently. They shouldn't cower public opinion. The goal is to get to the truth.
Don't you think there's a conflict of interest? Because I've read about scientists, reputable, educated people being paid to make a study or like fund your backing, but we're kind of expecting you to. I'll give you an example. In the 50s and 60s, cigarette companies paid scientists a lot of money to study the side effects, but it was denied. You're not going to like vastly shorten your lifespan by smoking, which we know now is completely untrue. So something like Machu Picchu or the pyramids, where people are calling into question, the design, the architecture, like, okay, there's some like foul play here, like something's not right. Do you think that's holding back everything?
I mean, I don't think we're going to get any definitive answers as to like how these works were created. But I was listening to a debate. I don't know if you listened to that debate between Abraham Loeb and Webb.
Mm-hmm.
And these are two incredibly intelligent scientists, and they both work in the same field. Basically, I mean, there's a lot of overlap, and to hear them debate the topic was so disappointing.
Because it's basically just, the conclusion is just, we don't know. We can't say definitively no.
So this man, well, one of the debaters, Abraham Loeb, has been named as one of the top 25 most important scientists in his field by Time magazine. And he was being mocked by the other scientists, and the man was mocking him. And the other man, Webb, I believe is his name, just published a book that is a college text. It's a college textbook, like an undergraduate college textbook, and it's titled something like "Where is Everybody?" And his position is, if there were aliens out there, there was life beyond our planet, he would have made contact with us by now. And since they haven't, that means that there cannot be life beyond our planet. So that's a textbook that's being used in college classrooms. And then the moderator asked him, said, so what would it take for you to believe that life exists beyond this planet? And again, in a very mocking fashion, he said, well, maybe if I was abducted and probed by an alien, then I would believe it. Now, he's saying this to right across from a man who's been recognized as one of the top scientists in the world, And the fact that these two men couldn't have a civil discussion was just really annoying. Really annoying.
I'm taking a classic UNO right now about fads and fallacies and like urban legends and stuff, and I used to really enjoy like watching Ancient Aliens and stuff. I thought it was very funny, but now I can't even sit through it. But talk more about just in general life beyond Earth and not necessarily aliens visiting the Earth in the past, I guess. To quote Mr. Ragland, it is very low probability that there does exist life beyond Earth, but there's even a lower probability that there isn't. And I don't know how familiar you are. Yeah. I don't know how familiar you are with the work of Carl Sagan, but I have a lot of respect for his work and just what he's done with Voyager and the Golden Record. So if you know about any of that, would you like to speak about that?
Well, I thought it was interesting that he was chosen to choose some of the material that would be on that disc. He provided a lot of input.
Explain to the folks at home what the golden disc is, or was, or is.
So I don't remember if it's on Voyager 1 or Voyager 2, but the Voyager probes were sent out in, I believe, the 90s. I'm not really sure about that, but they were sent out to become the first interstellar man-made objects. So Voyager 1 has officially left our solar system. And the goal of Voyager is to collect data as far out as it can report back to us. And the kind of the golden record that is attached to Voyager is to make contact with any extraterrestrial life that may exist outside of our solar system, and also give them a little bit of information about the Earth that they can hopefully play back from the record that was attacked.
And the content, I'm trying to remember, I read years ago.
Carl Sagan chose not to include images of war or disease. And I really appreciate his decision to do that. And I also just think there's a lot to think about regarding his decision on that. What do you think?
Well, did he think it would be a deterrent? Like,
I think
other life forms wouldn't want to visit our planet because of disease and war?
the way I saw it was the Golden Record was designed to reflect what it's like to be a human and our hopes for the planet and what we appreciate about ourselves on the planet. And he didn't think that war or disease was an accomplishment or something that we've succeeded at.
Do you think that's, I don't know, might be playing with fire because we have flying saucers come down, little grays pop out, and then they all die of like smallpox and like all these diseases that they had, like, oh, no disease, no war, perfect. And they like land. It's either a contentious area or a place racked with malaria. But it's like, I get it. It's like idealistic human experience on Earth.
But was the record intended to persuade other life forms to the Earth, or was it just to inform them about the Earth?
That's a good question. I was going to ask, do you think it was, because there was no like referendum in the United States whether or not we wanted to make contact with, life outside of Earth? Because I'm sure at least a good number of people are like, well, if there's aliens, we don't necessarily want to be in contact with them because that sounds like more problems that we would have to deal with. But it seems like these guys kind of did it, without much of a care of whatever anybody else thought. They got the okay from the U.S. government. But how do you feel about it? Do you think it's, let's say I gave you a 50-50 chance of like the alien race that we encounter is either a net positive or a net negative impact on, the human race. Would you take that risk?
I don't really know. I know that even though there are obviously a lot of bad things about the accomplishments of humans and of the state of the planet right now, but I think if I were an alien, then I would want to make contact with her. And despite what may lay on other planets or the problems that other races may have, I think in spite of it, I would want to know.
Okay.
So do you believe that other life forms have visited the planet
I do not.
in the past? You don't?
I do not.
Okay.
I do believe that there does exist life. I'm undecided on whether I believe that there exists intelligent life beyond Earth, but I am decided that there exists life.
Do you think they've ever made contact with Earth in any way? Okay. Yeah, I feel the same way. So, what about you, Mr. Curran? What do you think?
I think there are two paintings by Da Vinci that really piqued my interest. There's one painting by Da Vinci. It's Saint John the Baptist, and Saint John the Baptist said, "I am the light." I am the light. So when we think about John the Baptist, we think about rebirth, life, all of that. And Da Vinci has this really unique painting of John the Baptist, and it's a total a total departure from any other representation of John the Baptist that we've seen, and it's a real departure for for Da Vinci that it's considered one of his last paintings. In this work, John the Baptist, he's sort of androgynous, so that's one thing that to note. But he's pointing to the sky, but he has this like enigmatic smile, much like the Mona Lisa. You know, so it's like sort of like this telling look, you know, like this really, really enigmatic, this mysterious sort of smile. And that, with the gesture, to me, is really interesting. So you guys should check out the painting. You should check it out. And then there's another painting, Salvatore Mundi. That was the last painting to go on the auction block, and it sold for $450 million. And in that, it's the image of Christ, and he's holding this glass orb, and Da Vinci studied optics. I mean, he really knew optics. The Christ character is holding the orb in his left hand, and it's sort of pressed against his clothing. Now again, Da Vinci knew optics, and he believed in realism. He would even have sometimes like his subject's iris be larger on one side if it seemed like he was just turning or he was focused on a specific object, right? So he was all about realism. So it would stand to reason that we would see through the image of the man's clothing that it would be inverted or it would somehow be distorted at all. You know, it would be concave, but it's not. It's clear. It's clear. Now, Da Vinci, he knew that. You know, he knew that the image would somehow be distorted. So some scholars have said, well, he didn't want to distort the image. He did not want to distort the image. No, that he would have figured it out. You know, he would have figured it out. So now scholars are saying, well, maybe the glass orb is hollow, and if it was hollow, then it would be translucent, it would be transparent. But then that theory doesn't hold up because there are three little dots, what they call inclusions, and they're supposed to represent bubbles or some sort of gas that was trapped in the glass orb. So that suggests that it's not hollow. And if you look at, all right, I just imagine myself getting called into a meeting for this. But if you look at the three dots in the glass orb, they look much like the Orion belt. And we know Da Vinci was all about. We know he was all about code. So I think there's something there.
I'm not saying that I don't think you're right, but I'm not saying like you couldn't know that aliens haven't visited the Earth, but like the evidence that the people on like the Ancient Aliens TV show, the evidence that they present is just it's too far-fetched for me to have any belief in it.
How far would you be willing to change if you presented with some somewhat convincing evidence of extraterrestrial life interacting with humans? It was good, but it wasn't like 100% definitive. How far would you be able to change your worldview?
To me, it doesn't matter. I mean, I just like the mystery of it.
Okay.
I find the uncertain, the not knowing. I mean, to me, that's what's really interesting.
Yeah.
It'd be a disappointment, I think.
Yes, it was us. We built the pyramids. You're welcome. It was like, well, it takes all the fun out. You're right.
What would you do if, like, you found you were an alien?
What if you were the chosen one and you were the one to expose humanity to the wonders of
Pretty sure.
the stars? Oh, come on.
I don't know how familiar you are with Hank Green. He's a science communicator. He does crash course and stuff.
Yeah.
And his brother is a young adult literature author. A duology about the human race about aliens. And I'm blanking on the name right now. It was very good, and I think you would enjoy it. I really enjoyed the series. And it was more about the human experience and fame and stuff than about aliens, but there is a lot of mystery about it that I think you would enjoy. She got very famous, like internet famous, and her dealing with internet fame was very rocky, and people were definitely jealous that she was the one chosen to bring the knowledge about. And there was a group of people who were basically like their main purpose as a group was to hate her, and they presented a lot of things about how the aliens were dangerous and stuff like that. And they weren't, but they were trying to prove that they were to discredit her.
Did they want to crucify her? That sounds like a Messiah-esque kind of retelling of. Oh, okay.
I don't want to spoil.
So it's a series?
It has two. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say one thing before we go. My dad, he's a nut about aliens. Every night he comes home, long day of work, and it's ancient aliens. I don't know how many. Every night.
Are you serious?
I'm like, and when he's off, he's like, "Hey, Allie, you wanna go like fishing?" I'm like, "Not today, Dad. Aliens the whole night." And he falls asleep, and my mom's like, "I can't keep watching this stuff." You know, he switches like time to time history, but then
It always comes back to the aliens.
it circles back.
I think it's the people who I think it's be a little armchair psychiatrist, but
right.
it seems like I think it's a form of hope for a lot of people. It's like this greater thing.
I did want to ask you what you think about Stonehenge.
I don't really understand. I mean, I don't really understand Stonehenge.
The appeal.
The emojis.
No, I mean, I just don't understand how it came about.
Yeah.
Again, the technology, it doesn't make sense.
I was reading the Roman accounts of it was there when they got there. And they're like, there's literally nothing else on this island, on this godforsaken island, that is anything like this. And it's, I mean, people see pictures of Stonehenge, but, seeing it in real life, it's a lot bigger than people think. And it's, so it's like the Romans had no idea what it was. I mean, and they were very, we call it, superstitious, but, they would call it religious. They believed in deities out of their own pantheon that interacted with the human world. So I think they kind of just jotted it down to that, but it's interesting. Like, nothing else on this island is like that, and yet here it is. I mean, they have similar things in the East, and similar things in Rome, but in the middle of a forest, in this clearing where everybody's living in mud huts or cabins, and then you have this stone ornate arranged stone structure that maybe there's some meaning, maybe there's not. I mean, they were it's pretty shocking to them.
I read an article recently that some archaeologists have reproduced the methods in which they constructed it. So that's no longer a mystery, but they have definitively proved how they built it.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
But we still don't know why it was built or its function. And it's definitely more compelling to leave it out. We don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
but I think it gives credit where credit is due. The people that built it worked really hard on it, and they had a purpose, and they knew what it was.
Mhm.
And we shouldn't discredit them for building this amazing monument. And even though we don't know why it was built, or really personally understand how they built it, we can still appreciate its place.
Yeah. I think what was weird is that it was the only one of its kind. Like I think it's religious. It was they're Gallic kind of practicing, and they had smaller scale versions of Stonehenge, but it was pagan. Wait, what word? Gallic?
Yeah.
Oh, so that's so ethnicity of Gallic. That's how the Romans. It's like the Latin pronunciation. I'm going by the Roman accounts, which is what I've read and what I've researched, and it is Gaelic.
Scottish people speak Gallic, and Irish people speak Gaelic.
Yeah, I think Gaelic's the more. I'm not. I think Gallic is the antiquity kind of definition of these people, because it wasn't just like Irish or Scottish. It was everybody. You had Gallic people in Turkey, up from Britain to Turkey in Spain.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but I think that's how they classify it. It's Gaelic and then ancient Gallic. But what's weird is that it was the only one on that scale that they found. And compared to everything else that they had, they were just, I think it was probably just this Roman kind of almost arrogance. Like, these people have, compared to us, they have like nothing. And then this is, fairly impressive. So it's just interesting that that was the biggest one that they found. It was the only one on that scale that they found. But I had no idea that they had, figured it out. Like, okay, this is how they built it. I had no idea. But of course it wasn't easy, based on the scale. But it's weird.
It definitely meant a lot to them.
Right. So it's just weird that they only found one. But there is only one.
There are other stone structures like on the British Isles.
Yeah.
But there are none that are the same.
On that scale.
And that probably serve the same.
Yeah.
Well, I want to bring it back to Mr. Curran.
Sorry, Mr. Curran.
We know that it's here, right? We're still trying to figure out why it was there or why it's still here. And this is more kind of going more to a universal idea of, do you think there's a purpose for these type of things that happen in life? Do you think there is a purpose in life? Why we have to look at these Stonehenge emojis? Why they're now like a cultural icon? Yeah, what?
Break it down in
Stonehenge,
2 sentences.
that all derives from agriculture, right? Like the winter solstice.
Right.
It was a calendar.
Yeah. I think it just reflects their immense dependence on agriculture.
And is that still like the center of the universe? Is that
Agriculture.
agriculture?
Would you be a humble
Nature.
wheat farmer if you weren't a teacher?
Shakespeare?
Yeah.
Well, I believe that a more simple, keep your life the happier you go.
Some minimalism?
I think if you look at what you have in life and identify what is really important, then you'll be happy. If you think about like what you want, what you need, and then ask yourself, do I really need more?
Right.
you'll probably come to the conclusion that you don't. That you don't.
So try
It's
to
like
figure out.
furniture. How much furniture do you need in your house?
So I tried to tell my dad. So you're saying with all these like conspiracies, they're fun and all, but essentially they don't matter.
He's not saying that. You're putting words into his mouth.
I don't think we should try to understand everything. I think we should let some things go.
Scientists, I don't think they'll ever agree to that. I think they want an answer to everything. Do you think passions in life are just distractions we keep ourselves, busy with? So, I don't know, we don't think about our mortality. To get a little dark.
I mean, I think everyone is passionate. Should be passionate.
Good answer.
Well, yeah. Well, uplift us, Mr. Curran. Some words of inspiration.
Keep your life simple. Well, we've touched upon this like in AP language, and I have expressed like my concerns. Like I'm incredibly optimistic about the future, and I think things are going to change. I think you guys have a bright future ahead of you. We don't know. I mean, we don't know what the future is going to be, but I think based on what you've been exposed to over the past few years, I think there are going to be some real life lessons. And when you're in a position to actually change the world, I think you guys will make the right decision. But my concern for the younger generation is this constant loop that you seem to be living in, like as far as like time is concerned. We talked about this yesterday, like in AP language class. Life used to consist of like a series of tasks, and you could compartmentalize. You could complete a task, and then you would be done. You would be done with it. And you could take a break. You could stop, rest, and maybe move on to something else. But now it seems like that we're living in this 24/7 cycle, and it never stops. It never stops. School, I think, is an example. School for you is 24/7.
Especially with the
and you can't
COVID.
continue that. Like when you go to college, hopefully it won't be, it won't be like that. Well, first of all, it won't, because your college professors won't be answering emails, late at night, and the office hours are going to be like an hour and a half a day. So your professors will sort of stop you from that. They'll keep you. They'll say, okay, let's get some boundaries here.
I'm not your best friend.
Yeah, don't email me between this time slot. I don't need to emails after this time. Right, which I think is good. Which I think is good for you. So hopefully, it'll sort of wean you away from this sort of 24/7 lifestyle. But then going in when you join the workforce, because I have younger relatives, and they're on this. There's a wheel that never stops, and they're working all the time, and it's exactly what the parents want for them, because all of my relatives they all came from Ireland, and they all worked very, very hard to get to where they are. And their belief was that they were going to instill a strong work ethic in the children. The children were going to be successful, and they were going to be happy, because they had a strong work ethic. But now they're saying that their kids are working like all the time. They're constantly working, and they're successful, and they're happy, for the most part. But it doesn't seem like there's any sort of finish line. Yeah.
Jeez.
And for your generation, that's what I worry about. That you're just going to keep pushing yourself and pushing yourself and pushing yourself, and it's going to follow you into the workforce.
So that's something to close off on. So remember, kids, wise words from Mr. Curran. Take a break. Yeah. Read the funnies every now and then. Take a nap. Listen to this podcast. Everything's going to be all right. Mr. Curran is hopeful for the future, and so are we. So I think that's good. Thank you so much for being on, Julia.
Thank you for having me.
I love you, Julia.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Curran.
Thank you.
So tune in for more whenever we get these out.